So my name is Damon Edwards. My talk is about incident response, not the monitoring side, not the what happens before the incident, but how do we respond to it, specifically in large enterprises. So I said I'm Damon Edwards. I'm kind of a lucky guy. I get to see inside a lot of companies. I do a lot of work in the DevOps community. I was one of the early organizers of DevOps Days. Do a podcast with John Willis called DevOps Cafe. Anybody listen to that? Maybe? No? It's great. A few? Great. Thank you for listening. It's on iTunes. Also on Gene Kim's content committee for the DevOps Enterprise Summit coming up in November. I used to be a managing partner of DTO Solutions, which was a DevOps improvement, operations improvement consultancy. So got to see a lot of companies that way, high performers, low performers, everybody in between. And we really got to be known for helping to port sort of high-flying conference stage DevOps ideas into big enterprise context. And today I'm at Rundeck. I'm one of the co-founders. We make Rundeck. It's operations tools, orchestration, scheduling platform for operations as a service. So I'm on a couple notes. This is not a talk about monitoring. So there's a lot of monitoring talks here. So I'll let those folks who are far bigger experts in that do that than me. My interest is really in how do we improve operations, right, through organizational design, process improvement, and automation. So that's the things that I am here to talk about. And this is a talk really scoped on the enterprise, right? Small organizations can do things their own way. This is really talking about large-scale enterprises, right? So organizations where multiple business lines, a longer history of success, they've been around long enough to accumulate multiple generations of people and process and technologies, and it's all got to hang together in this place called operations to make it work. And whether people are doing cool agile stuff around the edges or old waterfall stuff around the edges, we have to keep all this stuff together. So this talk is really scoped to the issues around that. So let's start off by looking at what I'd say is a true story. This is a real incident that the names and the locations have been changed to protect the innocent. But this is an unfortunate, real life occurrence. Let me just switch over here. Sorry, can't see from here. Okay. Bear with me. All right. So this could be good out the side of my chest in my peripheral vision here, right? So all right. So it's 9:30 in the morning. Things start looking funny in the knock, right? You've got some red lights are going off. Things start slow. They're getting a little more fast and furious. People are like, hey, are you seeing this? Is this good? It can't be good, but is it bad? Is this really bad? We're not really sure, right? Things get progressively worse. Around 10 in the morning, phone rings, bring, bring. It's a business manager yelling, customers are reporting outages, reporting problems. What are you guys doing about it, right? So the first thing that knocks is, well, okay, we're gonna have to escalate this, right? Because we don't really know what's going on here. So Bob gets assigned this problem, and first thing Bob does, opens a ticket, right? Puts out the word, includes the business manager and the app-specific level 2 admins to saying, hey, we're seeing these errors. We don't know where it's coming from. We need to spin up a bridge call, right? So now here comes the bridge call, right? So hello, are you there? Hello, right? Everybody gets on the phone. Unfortunately, the level 2s, they don't have direct access to a lot of the production systems. So now we got to pause and go find Steve. Steve's our systems administrator that's got the right production access. So the bridge call is going around and around. We've got all the different L2s asking Bob, hey, try this, hey, try that. And of course, the business manager, they found their way into the bridge call, right? So now they're going, is it fixed? Is it fixed? What's happening? Customers, you're losing money. What are you doing, right? So, Oh, and down here, by the way, just a little note here. We call this the context wagon, right? So you can think about, the head count, but one of the dangers of the ticket-driven world is that everybody keeps getting added, right? And it keeps just adding more and more people to this context. So maybe they're not hands on the keyboard at that minute, but their email's going off, their Slack's going off, right? They're dragged into the context wagon, and away they go. So you're going to see that as we go here, right? So finally, right, all the L2s are getting together and saying, hey, it's this foo app thing, right? This foo service is always causing a problem. We know it's that, right? Hey, foo L2, can you fix that? No, I don't really know what's happening, right? So all right, so it goes back to Bob. Bob's now got to update the ticket. The ticket's going, hey, okay, well, we need a lead dev for the foo service, right? So let's send that out, right? Now let's change the scene, right? Let's go a few buildings away, right? There's Karen. She's one of the lead developers for the foo application, and she's locked and loaded. She's round the corner on this on the latest sprint. She's got the nice cup of tea. She's got the house music playing. She's just cranking away, right? Ding, the email goes off, and it's like, I'm just going to ignore that, right? Ding, the email goes off again. I'm just going to ignore that, right? And then suddenly, it's the app manager knocking on the door. Hey, Karen, have you seen that ticket? It's got your name on it. Okay, well, I guess I'll take a look, right? So Karen opens the ticket and is like, I don't really know what's going on here. I see a bunch of notes of alerts. I guess it's the foo app. But I need access to production so I can actually see what's going on here, right? So, Karen knows to update the ticket. The ticket pings the front door of the sysadmin team. Lucky for Karen, she's knows some people on that team. So, hops on hip chat, right? Very excited they just got hip chat in the organization. And hey, can someone help me with foo service, ticket, whatever. I need some stuff done, right? Finally, our buddy Lee comes to the rescue and says, yeah, hey, Karen, I can help you out. Right, well, I need these logs, right? So Lee goes and grabs the logs, and of course, I like to say it's the right logs, but of course they're not the right logs. So we got to go around and around until we get the right logs, maybe run a few more commands on the command line, right? And then finally, Karen gets all the information and goes, hey, I don't know what's going on here, right? But whoever restarted these services, and I don't know why they restarted the services, but they didn't use the right flags, right? Now, maybe they used the new script instead of the old script, or maybe they did it manually and read the wrong instructions, but all the wrong flags were used. This entire service pool needs to be restarted, right? All of these, the foo app and all the related services, right? So it goes back to Bob. Bob updates the ticket, right? Bob says, hey, middleware team, please urgent restart this service with the correct flags. Right? Notice now our context wagon's getting bigger, right? We've got everybody being pulled along through this ticket. And, the middleware goes, whoa, are you crazy? I'm going to pick the phone, call this, are you crazy, Bob? Like, this is the middle of the day. Like, you need business approval. Well, the business is already suffering. I don't care. I don't want it to be my problem that we took down more of the business. So you got to get approval before we do this, right? Now it's 2:30 in the afternoon. Remember, this started at 9:30 in the morning, right? So Bob's going to update the ticket and say, hey, SVP for line of business, has got to approve this because of customer impact. They're in a busy meeting somewhere, playing golf with a customer, right? Trying to convince them to spend more money. Luckily, they got a chief of staff, pulled them off the course, say, hey, we got to do this restart. What's the customer impact? I don't know. Well, these two technical VPs, they can best assess that, right? Because they're 6 degrees from the keyboard. And so they said, all right, well, I guess it's going to be okay. Let's approve this restart, right? Now it's 5 o'clock, right? Well, back to Lynn, the middleware manager. It says, hey, who knows these production services the best? Like, who's our go-to person around this? Oh, that's Ellen. Ellen knows things like the back of her hand, right? Well, Ellen was around at 2 o'clock, but now Ellen's on a plane because we're sending her to the European office because this big product launch is being slow, right? So Ellen's gone, right? So now we got to go. At this point, our context wagon, right? It's huge. Everybody's being pulled along here. Everyone's brains, kind of burning with this issue. It's 6 o'clock at night. Scott goes, okay, I haven't done this, but I'll give it a try. I'm going to dumpster diving through SharePoint, right, to see if there's any documentation. Does some trial and error. Scott's pretty handy, right? Says, all right, I think this is good, right? But we've had some bad problems, restarts, and other problems before. So the corporate scar tissue, right, is that the policy is that the middleware can't check their own work. The customer engagement managers, they're the ones that are only ones that can do all the API checks before you can call this thing done, right? Of course, now it's 7:30 at night. The only person there who's supposed to be the person who knows how to test these APIs the best. And Scott doesn't really know what they do. He knows there's some sort of test. He kind of has an idea of what they do, but no one's really told him. That's Varsha. It's Varsha's birthday. She's out, right, and having a good time like she should be. Finally, it's 9:30 at night. They pull Varsha away from her birthday party. Right, she goes home, opens her laptop, right, runs all the right API, thinks that, hey, this actually looks pretty good, And finally, 10:30 at night, middleware says services are okay, the lights are green, I don't know, Bob's asleep, I guess this incident is over, right? And we go, right? So, that is a true story and happens, time and time again in organizations that we. Does anybody feel deja vu there? Does that feel like, yeah? My people, my ops people, right? I spend too much time at DevOps conferences. Nobody knows this is really how bad it is. All right. So let's look at the non-fun condensed version of this. Right. This is just for talking to. Right. Knock alerts, business manager, phone call, escalate. Right. L2 bridge. Karen gets involved, identifies a problem with the restarts, escalation. Screw you. You need approval. Right. Finally somebody tests the APIs, and on we go. Right. And then you notice here, this is 13 hours after this incident started did we actually call this thing complete. And our context wagon just kept growing, and growing. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's take a DevOps sort of lens to this improvement, right? And when I talk about DevOps, I'm really talking about the lean improvement philosophies and looking at this like it's in really any other process, right? A lot of people look at DevOps processes as just deployment, getting from source code to production. But we all know that that's just one small part of the entire life cycle that needs to go on for our business. So we want to be able to look at these incident resolution processes as a process, just like anything else. Even though most of them are going to be one-offs, it's still a process that we should analyze and use that same lens to look at, right? So one of the key things learned in the DevOps world is to look to lean, right? So lean had this idea of there's 7 wastes, right? Wastes are things that get in the way of delivery of value. Mary Poppendieck translated those for the Agile world. We kind of took one step forward and look at them for the DevOps world. And yes, there's 8, not 7. So let's look at some of those wastes, right? So first of all, there's motion or manual, right? That means like extra things, extra steps that we're doing, or extra activity you have to do. In the manufacturing world, it was like, hey, if I want to drill a hole in the bumper, but I got to go to this shelf and I got to pull 4 things off and put something down and rechange the die and turn over here and do that. That's all motion, right? It's extra waste in the process, and it gets in the way. It's more likely something will go wrong. It's more likely it'll take too long to do things. So in the DevOps world, we look at it as, hey, it's either motion or something that's manual. Something that's manual is also motion as well. So a lot of things going on here, right? So all this going around to the try this, try that with the L2 bridge call, all of the work that we had Karen doing, trying to get the middleware to do the restarts. That whole process very manual. It's likely to be error prone. Tons of task switching. Right? So task switching is anytime there's a context break or somebody has to do one thing and then do another thing. It's very destructive. It's high cognitive load on doing that. So we had task switching on the bridge calls, task switching in those escalations, task switching on trying to get the middleware person to do something, and more of these, right? And tons of waiting, of course. Extra process. Why did we have to escalate, right? What was that really? Were those VPs, 5 degrees away from the keyboard, the best people to actually determine what the impact would be, right? Or can that decision be made closer to the keyboard? Why do we have that extra where the middleware people or the system admins can't run those health checks and API validations themselves? Why do we have to wait for somebody else to do it for us? Often this extra process is really a sign of that organizational scar tissue, right? Something happened bad before, so we're going to put a process in place. And something else bad will happen, so we'll put another process in place. And we're not actually judging if those processes are going to actually make things better in the organization. It's just something bad happened, therefore we have to do X. And those things build and build and build to the point where the organization really becomes kind of a arthritic with all this scar tissue. And then heroics, right? Any place that we need a named person. We needed Ellen, right? But she was on the plane. We needed Varsha, but she was at a birthday party, right? Those are obvious signs of if you have a named person in the process and they're the only person that can do that, there's a weakness in the process and also the risk of we're going to burn that person out, right? So heroics, while it sounds like a good thing to have, is actually a bad indicator from the perspective of the process, right? It's like if you're in a factory and you have one machine that runs at 100% capacity all the time, that machine's going to blow up first, or anything goes wrong with that machine, it's going to be a problem with the rest of the process. and so on and so forth. So, if you really, one good tip here is to really look at the value stream mapping ideas that kind of come out of the DevOps world. It really came out of the lean world, something to do with DevOps has started to use it, which is you analyze a process in this way, right? You take a black pen, you draw out the full process. You take the red pen, look through all the waste and things that went wrong. You take the green pen and talk about what can be done differently next time. You can also add up the cost. If we have time at the end, I'll show this incident. This is actually, this is where a company lost $1 million on an incident and had absolutely no one really knew what happened. So it's important to treat these as, just as important as your delivery processes, analyze your incident processes. Next step, DevOps is a lot about measurement, right? And make sure you're measuring the right things in your process, right? So mean time to detect, it seems to be like all the rage, right? How fast can you detect that there's an incident? And you see the more high-performing organizations, mean time to detect to them is almost like a vanity metric, right? Because all that really matters is, did we catch it before the customer did? Anything else is sort of, that's maybe something for the monitoring tools to judge themselves on, but it doesn't actually help the business, right? All that matters is, did the customers find it before we did, right? In this case, kind of simultaneous, right? Remember the business manager came running in with the phone call saying, you guys seeing these alerts. So mean time to detect, so mean time to detect is over there. So a lot of people would say, hey, 10 a.m., right? Half hour after that alert, that's our mean time to detect. We're pretty fast there, half hour. But the reality is, I think the better thing to look at is mean time to diagnose. And you see a lot of high-performing organizations, they say that's the one that we want to zero in on, which is when did we know what was actually wrong, right? And I don't have to know exactly what the solution's going to be, right, or how we're going to get out of this, but it's like saying, hey, I see somebody's unconscious, right? That kind of could be your mean time to detect. Well, that's not really that important. Like, are they drunk? Are they dead? Or they have a heart attack? Are they overdosing? Like, I don't know, right? I'm thinking like an EMT right now. What's more important is, do I have, initial diagnosis as to what is wrong with this, right? So I would put, the right MTTD that you want to talk about is more in this 2 to 2:30 time range, right? Either when the L2s decided that the food service was the problem, or when, Karen was the one that figured out that the restarts didn't happen properly. It's really up to your organization how you want to define that, but mean time to diagnosis is far better to track and is more realistic and more important than mean time to detect. It's just not that important other than beating customer impact. MTTR, right? Another one. So, often people think as mean time to repair, mean time to restore, and really they're talking about mean time to restore, which is really in our scenario here is at 6 o'clock at night, right? Was when all the services were back in their known good state. And that's obviously very important, right? Mean time to restore. But I think the more important metric to think about is mean time to repair, right? And this really exercises the entire cycle. How long until we knew what the problem was, we restored the service, and then we drove that fix back through the development cycle to where we redeployed whatever has to happen, whether it's changing the startup scripts or changing the application itself or whatever has to happen. How long until we can actually put a fix into place so this won't happen again? Too many organizations we see focus on their 5 whys. I know that's not all the rage anymore these days, but they go why? Oh, that's the problem. The better organizations go why? That's the problem. Now, what are we going to do about it? And when what we're going to do about it is done, that is the cycle time or the MTTR that they're really focused on. Again, it tells a lot more about the organization than how fast did we restore the service. So restore is good. Repair, or the ultimate fix, that is the ultimate measure. Cost, right? So, the cost seems pretty obvious. Like, in addition to the cost to the business, right, which we often aren't privy to, but is good to track. People look at the cost in terms of headcount, right? Oh, I had 1 person here, 2 people there. That was my cost. But the reality is, there's all of this context, right? Remember the context wagon I was talking about? And all that's very expensive. I mean, human beings are, woefully underestimate how good they are at context switching, right? If you read some of the academic, studies about it, the science definitely shows that the cognitive load of having to multitask is extremely high. The cognitive overhead, I should say, is extremely high. In fact, some say it's 20 to 25% for every major task that you add to your thinking about your brain at the same time. So, this context switching and also all this context wagon that everyone's getting, paged a dozen times is a very expensive thing, both in terms of human performance, and it also just burns people out to where communication becomes somewhat meaningless inside the organization because I just have a flood of tickets, right? Back in my old DTO days, we had a customer, a big healthcare company, for like a 2,000 person from a 1,500 person technology organization. Through the first 6 months of the year, they had over 25,000 requests for approvals go through their system, right? And each of those requests for approvals had 5 or 6 emails on average attached to them, right? So 125, 150,000 emails are going out in 6 months to different people in the organization to approve this, to look at this. And a lot of it's organizational scar tissue. Oh, we screwed up before, so now every VP has to know about every change. But it just completely burns out the organization, because if you try to even pay attention to a fraction of what comes across, you're just gonna, your brain's gonna explode. So what you do, you just shuffle it all off and away, right? So you have to consider the cost of that context switching and what you're doing to the organization with this very ticket-driven, way of doing it. So don't underestimate the cost of the context switching. So third sort of DevOpsy lesson here is the whole shift left idea, right? In the DevOps world, it's saying, hey, well, shift left, meaning let's push back to development I guess left would be this way for you guys. Let's push back from operations to development, solve a lot of these problems early on in the life cycle, deployment problems, monitoring, those sort of things. Take care of it early, so by the time it gets to production, we're in good shape. But in our world, there's a shift left lesson here as well, which is solve the problems over here, right? How do we focus on getting the problem solved in the L1, L2 timeframe or area, not all the way over in the L3, L4 range, right? So, really the idea being that, traditionally the idea is, well, hey, there's a problem, we're going to keep escalating until we find the person who can solve the problem. With that shift left mindset, it's how do we avoid the escalations and push the ability to take action as close to the issue, as close to the problem as possible, right? Whoever is closest to the problem, they have the most context, they have the most experience, they're experiencing it in real time. I want to push the ability to take the action and the ability to make a decision to take the action as closely as possible to those people, right? But what gets in the way, right? Silos, right? Silos, very DevOps, idea. So let's talk about those, right? How do we get rid of silos? So first of all, what is a silo, other than the things that ruin everything? A silo is not really just a team. A silo is a way of working, right? So imagine, you're the yellow people here, you're in your team, and you've got your own context, right? You're in the same mind space of the people you work with. You've got a single backlog, right, where your tasks are coming from. Your priorities come through that single set of priorities, common single set of tools you're using. So you're working in your own context, right? That's great, but the problem is in the enterprise especially, nothing lives in isolation, right? There's always going to be another group somewhere else in that same mode. They're in their own context. They have their own backlog that they're working from, and you're going to need something from them, or they're going to need something from you, right? And now we have where the work has to pass from one silo to another, and that is where most of the problems, really come into play, right? Bad handoffs, the waiting, all happen at the miscommunication. All happen at these breaks in context and between these silos, right? And probably the best indicator of a silo in an organization, if you go and look at it, is look for the ticket-driven request queues, right? Any place where somebody needs somebody else to do something, I got to go fill out a ticket. It goes into a queue. Somebody on the other side, a specialist, on the other side, is going to go just get something off that queue, whether it be because a PM yelled at them or because it was just next up naturally. There's that break in the context. There's that break in a different set of priorities, different sets of tooling, different context, and this is where so many of these problems happen, right? I mean, think about it. I need something done. I put in this in the request, right? I'm number 67 in the list, so I got to go get somebody to escalate it. Finally, somebody pops off something else and says, "Hey, I can do this for you." Right? They have no context of what that is, so they're parachuting in. So by definition, they're probably making kind of a one-off. They're going to do something, they send it back, right? It didn't go right? They send it back to you and ping pong back and forth. So if you look at an organization, look for anywhere that the between groups is being managed as a ticket-driven request queue. You can almost guarantee that there's these silo behaviors starting to form in there, which is only natural. I mean, people want to do what they want to improve their job. If I'm the best firewall rule changer west of the Mississippi, right? Every Thursday, I'm going to change my firewalls better than anybody has ever changed them before. And if you get your request in on Wednesday by 3 o'clock, I'll make sure I'll do it, right? But then I'm not a network engineer, so I'm filling out a ticket. I don't know what to write here. It goes back to them. Something wrong, right? I missed my window. Now I'm waiting until the next Thursday, right? So People in the silo are going to optimize for their silo. It's human nature. It's what they're, kind of were built to do. But we have to think about how that behavior is going to affect everybody else. And the big problem is these ticket systems, I already mentioned the silo builder, but they're also snowflake makers, right? Because I'm the specialist and I parachute in and I get my ticket, I'm probably going to create a one-off, right? Because I'm a DBA, I need to do something here, right? Or I'm the firewall change person, I'm going to do something here. And the problem with these snowflakes is they might be technically correct. I might have crafted this perfect solution or perfect thing that was told to be done, but it's probably a little bit different than the next time I do something, or that somebody else would parachute in and do it a little bit differently. And those little differences make it hard to automate, make it real easy to have mistakes later on. Somebody else comes along and expects something else. So these ticket-driven request cycles, they end up creating silos, and they create snowflakes, and bad things happen, right? So we want to get rid of those silos. So the popular kind of technique these days is, well, hey, let's replace those silos with cross-functional teams, right? Instead of having breaks in context, right, and these request-driven kind of handoffs, let's put all of them together on one team, right? So let's build these cross-functional teams. Let's put developers and testers and operators all together. They can be dedicated to a particular product or set of services, and they can just go, right? And we'll stay out of their way, and we won't have any of those handoff problems, right? The problem is in a large enterprise, again, nothing lives in isolation. So I'm going to have all these things, usually operations things that live outside of those teams, right? I can't give everybody enough DBAs. I can't give everybody their own data center, right? I can't give everybody their own network team. I can't give everybody their own security folks because I have too many of those, right? I have way too many services for all these people to maintain, sort of one, for each of these delivery teams to maintain. So I need some sort of centralized, NOC or SRE function to try to manage it for them. So I need all of these external groups. So now I'm right back to where I was before, right? Ticket-driven request cycles, and right back to our same problem. So how do we get rid of those ticket-driven request queues? That's just really this idea of operations as a service, right? So what we're saying there is instead of having this ticket-driven request queue where that's how people's mode of working, establish a common platform. This is the operations as a service design pattern. Whereas I'm going to have a common platform, and it's going to work like this. I'm going to encourage those delivery teams, anybody who actually makes something, right? Whether it be I'm a development team building a service, or I'm a platform engineering team building the next version of our standard environment. Have them define the procedures to care and feed for those things. Pick a vocabulary in your organization and say everything's going to have a start, a stop, a restart, a reconfigure, clear caches, health checks level 1, level 2, whatever it might be, but have a standard slotting, and anybody who creates something needs to define those procedures. Then you have the people who are the operations team who's going to be running those procedures. Number one, you can have them vet those procedures. Look at the platform and say, hey, thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this something that we're going to want to do? Add their own special sauce and knowledge to it. And then also they're in control then of the policies, right? Sorry. I thought my mouse is over there. So they're then in charge of the policies, right? Meaning that who can run these things. Maybe it's just that NOC team. I want them to run it. Maybe I want to let developers start to run their own processes as well. But ops is in charge of the policies. And then both ops and whoever I give access to can then execute these procedures on demand, right? So instead of having to fill out a ticket and wait in turn, I now have that. I can now do these operations tasks myself on demand when I need them, right? So imagine kind of creating like an Amazon API for all the things that you do in your organization, right? No one's going to say that it's getting in their way. They now have the ability to both define that procedure and execute those procedures. But probably one of the biggest sort of shifts here is it really changes how organizations think about automated procedures, right? So in general, instead of being a monolithic thing, there's really kind of 3 elements to any automated procedure. There's the ability to define it, the ability to execute it, and then the governance over that procedure, right? Which is the security, the oversight, the compliance, who can run what, right? So in traditional operations silo, all of these are on the operations side, right? And the first step that people like to do is say, well, I'm going to do some of this self-service. I'm going to give them a button, right? And we like to call this kind of rigid self-service because they can't really change the button, but I'm going to give them the button and the ability to do that, right? So really, it's very limited as to what I can actually offload and give to these external groups. So, then kind of the next idea is, well, hey, how do I make these handoffs more high velocity? So instead of having them, the development side give me this Word document that tells me do this, then do that, and then the operations side has to, create the automation for that, and then turn around and let somebody use it. How do I push the ability to define those procedures to somebody, who's outside of the traditional operations domain? And then, when I can give both, when I can give the ability to define a procedure and the ability to execute the procedure, but retain governance for myself, I've got my ops hat on right now, then that's when I get to self-service operations, right? Ops maintains control, but development, QA, NOC, whoever else that you want to participate in procedures, they can both define and execute those operational procedures. And even in the more high-performing organizations we see, they're actually pushing the governance to those teams as well. I got multiple lines of business. Maybe I'll create the shell of what they can and can't do, but I'll let them manage who can run what inside their own world. And so, all this really maps back to that operations as a service idea, which is, hey, that I can move the definition, the execution, and the governance of those procedures to wherever in the organization it makes the most sense to, number one, take advantage of my labor, right? So offload a lot of capacity from operations. And number two, to where it's going to improve the flow of work the best, right? Where I can move as quickly as I want to as an organization. So, what that tends to generally look like, and we see this a lot because, being the makers of Rundeck, the open source kind of operations as a service scheduling and orchestration platform, we see a lot of people going through this process, right, to establish that operations as a service capability. Number one, they're defining a secure hub, right, to say this is my operational hub that really has two pieces. One is I'm working to pull in all of the kind of health and current configuration information that I need. So give somebody the context to solve a problem, right? So it's not just my monitoring data, but also, hey, how do I get what's the current configuration of that environment? What's the current configuration of that particular service, right? Pull that into this hub, and also give them all the procedures they need to execute that standard operating procedures that I had talked about. And then I can start to give operations, my internal operations support folks, these standard procedures to run. Imagine if the L2s in that original incident had these kinds of procedures. They could have taken actions themselves, or even the L1s, right? And I can start to open things up and say, hey, I want to give engineers and other parts of the organization the ability to run, whether it be health checks first, or maybe it's actual take remediation. It's all going through this platform. And operations is in charge of, the secrets, the access control, who the identity is, all the access policies, all the auditing. It's all managed in one place jointly by security and operations. And that's great, but that kind of still feels like a silo. So the next step we always see them doing is, well, taking those procedures and turning them into code, right? To say, hey, these are remediation procedures, these run books, these standard operating procedures. Let's treat them as code. Let's put them in source code management, and let's put them through a code review, right? So now we have developers creating them. We can have ops and security doing code reviews to decide, is this good, is this bad, thumbs up, thumbs down, accept them or promote them into production, and then turn around and give people access. So now I'm getting that high velocity handoff, and things are starting to move a lot faster, and I'm offloading more and more of those that kind of day-to-day operational grind. And then step 3 is expand from there. Attached to my ticket systems, attached to my artifact repositories and those sorts of things. Basically, bring more and more information into this dashboard. And by doing that, we then see is that it really makes compliance happy, right? Because in the past it was, well, I can't give people access to these environments, so I have to have that stilted sort of escalation path. But now by having this kind of platform in place, I know where the procedure came from, who reviewed it, who ran it, when they run it, where they run it. I got the approval trail, right? I can use tickets and tie those things in to say yes, go ahead and do this. I know who created the access policies and everything, right? So all the evidence collection happens automatically, and you can actually make the argument that working in this way is actually far more secure because I've got this audit trail than before, which was I only going to let certain people do this kinds of activities. So you can expand the people who can participate in the operational roles, but also being actually more secure, right? We call that going faster and being able to lock things down at the same time. So kind of last of the DevOps mindset shifts here is encourage developers to think operable first, right? You'd be surprised that in a lot of organizations, developers have this mindset of, writing the code's the business, right? And being in operations, you know that the running service is the business, right? If the code doesn't run, we're not making any money, right? So these are the kind of set of things that that we see as common ways for operations to start to bridge that gap with development, and kind of encourage them to develop with an operable first mindset, right? Deployability, configurability, monitoring. These are all service features. They're as important. They're first-class citizens to the business features. If it doesn't run, we're not making any money. So build those into the product and treat them as first-class citizens. Your feature requests, ops feature requests, matter just as much as the business feature requests. I know it's hard for a lot of organizations to hear. Build configurability into the service. Don't externalize it. Demand prod-like environments. Make handoffs between teams, verification driven. So don't just give raw code. Give the tests and along with it to verify that thing's healthy. Standard packaging, so on and so forth, right? So kind of the last point there is really just making sure that as an operations organization, you're talking to the development organization about what does it mean to be operable first, operations first. So kind of last thing here, I want to look at a company that has been really doing a really good job the last few years of of improving their incident response capabilities. So Ticketmaster, you guys bought tickets from Ticketmaster? Yeah, probably. Oh, yeah. So they had a big problem. This is going back a couple years. They're all about fan experiences. People want Adele tickets. People want Yankee tickets, right? And they realized that for their main web operations, their main web ops incidents, the average MTTR was 47 minutes, right? So that's a long time. When people can't buy those tickets that they want, or they can't sell their tickets, or the Yankees want to print their playoff tickets, right? This is a big deal. This is not just TechCrunch news. This is CNN news, right? So they had a new set of executives that came in. Jody Mulkey, their new CTO, Justin Dean, their new head of ops, and then Mark Mon had been there for a while. He was a key tooling guy and had sort of laid down some of the groundwork for this. But they started this program they called Support at the Edge, right, to really revamp how they responded to incidents and the capabilities they built to do that. And the results after about 18 months were really striking, right? So they went from an MTTR of 47 minutes, and this is mean time to restore, right? Going back to my earlier thing. MTTR of 47 minutes down to an MTTR average of 3.8 minutes, right? That's like a 90% reduction in MTTR. 50% reduction in escalations. Now that people weren't really expecting, but they loved it, right? That half of the escalations went away, right? So all those interrupts, all those people that had to get woken up, half of that went away. And the business loved it because they cut their support costs. The amount of time and the head count and the context switching that they had to spend got cut almost in half. So it was a quite striking thing. So how do they do it, right? So there was kind of three key steps here, right? The first one is they put a new kind of organizational support and escalation model in place, right? They were moving towards that DevOps, small, autonomous, aligned teams. They still had a centralized NOC at this point. They still had a lot of those specialist teams. So looking at, well, how do we improve our escalation model, first of all, right? And they kind of came up with this metaphor of, like a medical metaphor, right? The TOC, so they call their network operations center, they had a 15-minute, they're the EMTs, right? They had a 15-minute SLA. After that, they had to escalate to the SREs. They're at the ER team, right? They had a 30-minute SLA. And then the production engineering, which were the teams that supported those autonomous delivery teams. They were like the trauma surgeons, right? They had an hour. And then beyond that, they had the specialist surgeons, right? The data services, platform engineering, the global network team. And you might say, well, this is kind of going against what we've been talking about because this is just escalating faster. So how does that really help? And the key thing was that they pushed that ability to take the action closest to the problem, right? So the NOC or the TOC that was literally just escalators in the past. They looked at red lights and figured out who to call. How do we turn them back into operators? Give them the buttons to go ahead and push. How do we give the SRE all the specialist procedures created by the production engineering and the data services teams, and the specialist teams, so they can take action? So that's really went from there. So the key was really that ability to push the ability to take action closest to that problem, and then a long-term investment in operability, right? Deployment, configuration, monitoring, runbooks. That didn't come really till after this initial 18-month period, but that is a key part of their their strategy. So essentially, what they initially started with was, hey, automated ops procedures written and vetted by the delivery teams, right? Those are the development teams, right? The product development teams. Then ops remain full control of who can run those policies, or who can run those procedures. Some lines of business they want to give it to the NOC. Some lines of business they want to give it to back to the delivery teams to do their own operations. They turned the NOC back into operators. They started to empower different developers, development teams based on the line of business with the ability to do their own self-service operations, and then combined with that new EMT model, and that's how really they took it down from that 47 minutes to the 3.8 minutes. And it's all publicly referenceable stuff that they've been talking about. I think now they're in the point where I heard recently that something like 94% or something like that of all incidents are resolved by either the product support teams, which aren't even the NOC, or the NOC itself. So it's pretty striking how far they've come, and it's a pretty interesting story. So recap: use lean thinking and analyze like any process. Make sure you're measuring the right things, right? Shift left that control and decision making. Get rid of silos. Establish operations as a service, and encourage your developers to think operable first, right? So that's me. That's my talk. Damon Edwards. I'm Damon at Rundeck, at Damon Edwards on Twitter if you're so inclined. And I think I've got like 3 minutes if anybody has any questions or wants some counseling for that being triggered by that incident at the beginning.
If you do have a question, come forward to the microphone for the benefit of the recording.
Anybody? No? Going once, going twice. All right.
No, none. Come on, Damon gave great talk.
They'll all come up afterwards.
All right, Damon.
Thank you.
Damon will be available for you to. Oh, we have one.
Yep. There we go. Thank you. I feel better now.
Well, I thought my organization had complicated and overly ornate and inefficient processes for resolving problems until I saw your little demo that you started the talk with. So that was pretty interesting. It's nice. I was happy to see that some of the crazy problems you pointed out we've already worked around. We've managed, like for example, we automate developer access to production workstations. It just has to go through the chain of approvals and so forth, and as you mentioned later. But how do you get the upper layers of people? You can't always change these things without people who want to change.
Yeah.
And how do you get your upper management interested to show them that, hey, this process, it's getting better, but we're still really in really bad shape compared to what the industry standard is.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make it turn into cost, right? So I'd say use the lean techniques that you see on the delivery side. Like everybody wants to, make their delivery processes super efficient, right? Because everyone's focused on getting to production, right? All the business metrics are about getting to deployment, right? Woo, check that off, right? We delivered, right? But the reality is far more of the cost goes into what happens after deployment. So that the whole mapping, just map them out, right? Take your common sets of incidents, map them out, and then turn them into that supply chain type problem to show where the thrash in these problems come from. Because then it becomes obvious. When you see it in that like storyboard form, right? You're like, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this, right? And that's kind of how we came about. That's actually what really happened, right? So if you show it to it that way, then anybody with any kind of MBA programming in their background will go, oh, this is the worst supply chain or manufacturing process I've ever seen. They don't have to care what the boxes do. They'll just see what goes around. So if you do it that way and elevate these post-deployment processes to be as important as your pre-deployment processes, and then you can make the economic case that this is what it's costing the organization. I didn't have time to show it, but there's that incident that, I mean, literally $1 million of cost was evaporated in the organization, and nobody really knew about it because it was one of 15 annoying things going on for that couple of weeks in the organization, right? So unless you make that cost visible, then you can't make that argument.
Do you have a pointer to that? A link we can read about this offline?
Yeah, I can put it up and I'll show it to you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Damon.
Yeah, thank you.
We are now.